अज्ञानतिमिरान्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मीलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः. Nityanandam. In this episode, there is mention of guilt, which is one of important emotion that will cause us sometimes or many times it can cause hindrance to what we want to manifest in life, and that is not based on actually authentic emotion, because it is mostly based on societal conditioning, where because of certain restrictions or some of the limitations that the society we grew up in puts on us throughout life. So in this episode, he talks about how to handle the guilt and how to get rid of it. Basically, there's no need to be attached to that or let the guilt affect any of our manifestation in life. Enjoy this episode. This is Sarveshwarananda, Nityanandam.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we take your source material and distill it into knowledge you can immediately apply. Look, we all carry baggage. We all have those deeply ingrained feelings of self-judgment.
A little inner critic.
Exactly. The voice that's always whispering about how we could have done better or how we, fundamentally failed. And that feeling is so often defined by just one thing: guilt.
It's a universal burden, for sure. But today we are embarking on a deep dive into a highly provocative source. We have a full transcript from a specialized spiritual lecture series.
And the title of this series is Freedom from Guilt. It doesn't just analyze guilt, it makes a really radical claim.
It does, and that's the hook we're running with today.
Right. The lecture argues that the feeling of guilt is not some inherent moral failing. It's not an intrinsic part of being human. It's a systematic imposition, something that is literally built into us from the outside.
So our mission is to trace that argument right from its absolute root. We really need to unpack this idea. What exactly does the speaker claim is the foundational origin of this whole pervasive system of guilt?
And what are the mechanisms that keep it going throughout our lives?
Exactly. We're tracing the intellectual and I guess the social origins of emotional baggage according to this very specific, and I think you'll find very compelling, framework.
Okay, let's unpack this then. The foundation of the argument, it seems to start by defining our initial state, our unburdened condition.
Right. The source material argues that a human being, a child specifically, starts life in a state of fierce, natural innocence. Fierce, absolutely. The source contends that the body, in its original state, is explored without questions. And what drives this exploration is what the speaker calls furious curiosity.
You see that with any toddler.
Right. Of course. They're naturally free, they're completely innocent about their own physicality, they're just seeking information and experience without any kind of prejudgment.
That sounds like a wonderful, unburdened starting point, but... Okay, the source then argues that this natural state gets derailed almost instantly. Where does that interference start?
The problem, according to this lecturer, begins almost immediately, and it's systematic. The source points to 3 key agents of this interference: parents, society, and the media.
Big 3.
The big 3. And the claim is that they do not allow this natural curiosity and exploration to continue. It's this continuous external intervention that's responsible for creating that initial subtle sense of wrongness.
A sense of wrongness about what is, at its core, natural behavior.
Exactly.
What's interesting is that the source doesn't seem to frame it as malicious. It's more systemic. Like we're just passing down inherited biases.
That raises a really important distinction, yeah. The material is focused specifically on the denial of clear, honest information, especially about the body and, life philosophies.
So the interference isn't just stopping the child.
No, it's about providing what the source calls foolish answers.
Ah, the foolish answers problem. So when that natural curiosity kicks in and the child starts asking the big questions, and they do ask hard questions, they're met with evasions or moralizing or just dishonesty.
And the analogy the lecturer uses for this, it really makes the point stick with you. The speaker compares getting these vital facts to asking for a market price on something.
Okay.
But instead of a firm number, the answer you get is complete guesswork. It's an assertion that the answers society gives aren't rooted in fact or clarity at all.
They're rooted in the discomfort and the shame of the person who's answering.
Exactly that. which means the child is consistently denied clear, honest answers. This failure to provide factual knowledge doesn't just leave a blank space.
It creates a vacuum.
A vacuum.
Yeah.
And that vacuum, according to the material, has to be filled somehow.
And that's the critical pivot point, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's where the real psychological damage starts to set in.
It is. Because that initial honest search for knowledge is stifled by these evasive answers. The individual who is still driven by that inherent curiosity, they have to search elsewhere. They need answers, and they will find them.
And the source material is very direct, almost blunt, about where this search leads when the trusted sources fail.
It is. The lecture specifically mentions seeking knowledge through avenues that are readily available, but often wrapped in secrecy and shame. Things like blue films, porn movies, or magazines.
And the source insists that these alternatives, they provide something much worse than just confusion.
Far worse. They offer an incomplete, distorted picture of reality. And look, this isn't a moral judgment on the sources themselves. It's a judgment on the knowledge they impart.
It's partial, it's skewed, and it's delivered without any real context.
Precisely. And this is where it gets really interesting, because the consequence of consuming this distorted, shame-based information is profound.
The source claims this search leads not just to confusion, but to a state of guilt and what it calls intense violence.
Okay, we have to define that term immediately, or it sounds misleading. When the speaker says intense violence, they are not talking about physical conflict.
Right.
They mean an internal self-destructive psychological turmoil. Because the knowledge is distorted and it's consumed in secret, the individual uses that external shame they've inherited to just viciously judge themselves.
So the guilt is basically self-inflicted violence.
Yeah.
And it stems from incomplete shame-based knowledge.
That's it. And the ultimate result, according to the speaker, is a mishap in your personality.
A mishap in your personality.
Yeah, think of your personality not as some fixed thing, but as a house you're building. When a fundamental component like honest knowledge about yourself is replaced by warped material, that distorted information, the whole structure becomes unstable.
And that instability, that continuous self-judging turmoil, that is the mishap.
Yes. And this internal violence is constantly being fueled by external triggers that reinforce the self-judgment.
Which brings us to teasing.
Yes. The source highlights teasing as a crucial societal tool for maintaining this whole guilt system. It doesn't matter if you are being teased or if you're the one teasing someone else.
You're still reinforcing the system of judgment.
You're reinforcing the system. And the source gives specific, maybe a bit heavy-handed examples of gendered teasing, like teasing someone as being weak or dirty.
These labels, these specific accusations, they're the mechanisms that teach the individual how to internalize that self-violence.
Because the precise moment the guilt system is truly activated, the trigger that the lifelong self-judgment is built on, is when somebody tells you something is wrong with you.
Wow.
That external accusation, that specific judgment, is what creates the entire scaffolding for a lifetime of guilt.
So what does this all mean for you, the person listening right now? The lecture is framing the experience of being judged or receiving moralistic lessons.
Even the seemingly benign ones.
Exactly. The source briefly mentions being told smoking is bad. Even that is seen as the mechanism by which this guilt system gets passed down. It's the continuous judgment, especially when it's tied to our natural curiosity, that creates and sustains that internal violence.
Absolutely. The individual is constantly forced to judge themselves based on these external shame-based definitions of wrongness. And this system, once it's activated, it just becomes self-perpetuating.
Now, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the force does offer a kind of cultural alternative to this cycle of shame, right?
It does, and this is a really fascinating detour. The lecture contrasts our modern shame-based experience with traditions that are exemplified by, for example, historical South Indian temples.
Okay,
These temples are cited because they reportedly contain explicit public statues and detailed descriptions of advanced postures and concepts. The speaker even mentions classical terms like Nagabali and statues depicting intercourse.
So why are these cultural examples so important to the source material? Why bring up ancient temple statues in a discussion about modern guilt?
Because they provide a cultural counterpoint that just fundamentally challenges the modern narrative of shame and secrecy. The argument is that this public ancient representation reflects the idea that historically, knowledge about the body and sexuality and profound life concepts,
They were just integrated in public.
they were meant to be learned openly.
So the source is arguing that this historical transparency suggests learning about these subjects should never invoke shame. It makes a direct, powerful comparison.
It does. Learning from these clear, ancient cultural touchstones is fundamentally different from getting your knowledge solely from sources like porn movies, which carry all that baggage of secrecy, distortion, and moral shame.
This whole section introduces the idea that cultural transparency is really the key component that's missing from our modern, guilt-ridden approach.
And if that knowledge is delivered openly, without judgment, then the initial vacuum that leads to the shame-based seeking, it just never forms in the first place.
Which leads directly to the concept of the ideal teacher, or master. The source emphasizes that a true master should approach teaching these complex concepts not with reluctance, but with gratitude.
That gratitude is vital. It means the teacher is thankful for the opportunity to impart knowledge, and they're willing to do it without breeding guilt.
A non-judgmental approach.
Which is crucial for helping the student understand fundamental life and body philosophies clearly, without attaching all this moralistic weight to simple facts.
So this ideal relationship, it offers external clarity. But the lecture then shifts the focus back to a more difficult truth, that even with cultural alternatives and great teachers, the liberation from guilt has to come from within.
That's right. The individual must eventually understand that they are alone in their ultimate journey, even if they have love and support. The source is very clear on this. Parents and society cannot take suffering from you.
So that ultimate realization means that inner work is strictly required for release. You have to be the one to heal the system that was imposed on you.
It's a message of fierce self-reliance. You have to dismantle the machinery of guilt, piece by piece, yourself.
And, typical of a spiritual lecture series, the source doesn't just offer philosophy. It offers a practical, physical path toward release.
Yeah, this is where the framework gets very specific and intangible. The speaker provides an instruction for a physical release. It's designed to counteract that stored intense violence, that internal tension.
Yes, the description is very detailed. It involves physically rotating the body 30 hand swings right.
Yeah.
While you're concentrating on the Navel Center.
And why the Navel Center and physical rotation? Well, the framework suggests that the energy associated with this guilt, this self-inflicted violence, is literally stored in the body.
So the practice is a physical way to dislodge that energy.
An immediate way to release the internal pressure. It's the application of the philosophy to the physics of the body.
Which brings us to the final synthesis. Guilt, as it's presented here, isn't just an emotion. It's a learned mechanism that prevents people from fulfilling their true potential in all their key relationships, as a brother, a sister, a son, a daughter.
It's a fundamental barrier to authentic connection. The whole system is predicated on keeping the individual small and restricted through judgment.
So the solution lies in reversing that initial systemic judgment, the one that begins when someone is told something is wrong with you.
It's about dismantling that imposed system and reclaiming the natural, unburdened, furious curiosity we all started life with.
So it's a comprehensive roadmap, from innocence to systematic interference, through distortion and internal violence, and finally to a cultural and physical path toward release.
And the goal is what the source calls inner awakening, the freedom that comes from knowing you are fundamentally okay. Ultimately, the core argument is that the cultural transparency and honesty we lack today are what create the conditions for lifelong guilt.
We replace factual, grateful teaching with fearful, moralistic judgment. And this source material argues that a natural, curious question about life or the body is so often met with a dishonest answer rooted in cultural shame. Which raises an important question for you, the learner, to consider long after this deep dive is over.
If the initial universal source of our deepest guilt is the denial of clear, honest answers delivered with clarity and gratitude, then how often do we unknowingly perpetuate this cycle of shame and distortion when interacting with the younger generation, or even when suppressing and judging our own natural impulses? What would our internal landscape look like if learning were always delivered with clarity, honesty, and gratitude? That is the essence of the freedom from guilt this lecture proposes. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.